This is TWiT.
There's been a lot of news surrounding Apple and its App Store lately. Lots of news surrounding the way that it is working and not working with developers, the concerns surrounding Apple's approach to sort of fair practices in the App Store, and then a number of suits across not just the country, but the world involving these antitrust concerns that have been sort of thrown Apple's way. And there's been some kind of, over time, there have been some developments that have taken place. And so I wanted to bring someone onto the show to talk about those developments. And so we have Six Colors' own Dan Moren here with us today, coming to us from Boston, which has way too many sister cities and won't give Petaluma one. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Mike. I want to let you guys know that I make my forts out of pillows so I can hold them up myself. It's a lot easier that way, trust me.
That is smart.
Pro tip for you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being a pro, which is the segue I'm going with, you are a pro when it comes to Apple. And I wanted to talk to you, actually, a couple of things. This is interesting because I brought you in to talk about Apple and its plans for allowing reader apps to link to their sites. But before we get to that, I think it's good to kind of establish a little bit of the environment right now and what's going on at Apple when it comes to the App Store. So could you actually talk before that about Apple's decisions when it comes to how it settled the class action lawsuit with developers?
Sure. Yeah. So Apple got it was involved in this class action lawsuit, which was brought by a certain group of developers. And essentially, these developers were alleging that some of the ways that Apple does its business is not exactly fair. So Apple decided to settle this case. Obviously, the developers agreed to that, potentially in large part because the chances of beating Apple in a straight courtroom case was not going to work very well. And so as a result, they gained what I think a lot of media companies framed as sort of concessions from Apple, but which actually turned out to be things that were more like, well, we're doing things this way, and we promise we'll keep doing them this way for at least a little while. So there were very few actual changes to the policies as a result of that. I think the biggest that sort of came out of it was there was one about letting developers use more price points, essentially being able to set their prices at more levels than Apple had given the option before, which is good for developers, but also not bad for Apple because Apple still makes a cut no matter what that price point is. There was also a concession about essentially not banning or in other ways like punishing developers for reaching out to customers via email, sort of outside of the confines of an app in order to be able to sort of give them other options or talk to about like other communication, communicate to them other things about their app. And so those were sort of a few of the biggest ones. I mean, there's other stuff in there. There's like Apple launched its small business program last year, which is the one that cuts the percentage of Apple's take to 15% if you're making less than $1 million. And it promised it would keep doing that for 3 years. The downside to that potentially being that it won't refine the program, and the program already has some issues. So this is not necessarily a straight up win for developers. So overall, I think the concessions gained in that class action lawsuit for developers themselves were fairly minor. That didn't stop Apple from patting themselves on the back and declaring that the App Store continues to be an economic miracle.
Yes, indeed. There was, I know, a lot of talk about how this didn't quite feel like it was sort of sticking with the stuff that was already there for the most part, and not really bringing in anything new, but making it seem as if that was the case. Now, that may be the case with that, and there's been a lot of coverage of Apple's work with developers or lack thereof. But a more recent story, in fact, just on Wednesday, Apple, in response to an investigation from the Japan Fair Trade Commission, has made some, or is going to be making some upcoming changes to its App Store agreement and policies. Could you talk about what's going on here and what Apple has decided it's going to do?
Yeah, this is really interesting because it's clearly Apple trying to sort of manage this rising tide of investigations and regulators and governments and legislators all looking into this. The way the App Store does business and the antitrust concerns around it. And so as a result of this, this is an agreement that they made with the Japan Fair Trade Commission that essentially says we will allow developers of so-called reader apps, which is a category that Apple has basically come to define anything where you get content or subscribe to a service outside of an app and then access it using an app on your phone. So for example, if you buy a book on your Kindle and you want to read it in the Kindle app on your phone, that's a reader app. You can't use the Kindle app on your phone to go buy a book from Amazon. But if you've already bought that book, you can read it on your phone. If you subscribe to Netflix via Netflix's website, for example, you can access Netflix on your phone, but you can't necessarily subscribe to Netflix on your phone. And so Apple is basically making a concession here, which is saying, look, we will allow developers of these types of apps to put a link in their app that will let users, and this is specific to what they said, though they haven't spelled out everything about this, they say for users to set up or manage an account. So that can mean a lot of different things. We haven't seen clarification from Apple about exactly what the details are, and the devil is in the details when it comes to Apple. Apple has shown no reluctance in the past to basically spell out very, very specifically where, when, how apps can provide links to outside material or how they have to do things. So I think the guidelines, which it's promised to update in advance of this rule taking effect, are going to be very telling in terms of saying exactly how developers can do this. And I'll also note it is as they clarified a single link. They're allowed one link outside of their app.
Okay, interesting. So then let me ask you this. This change for developers, I think, be they big or small, there's lots of applause going on there, I think, and folks are looking forward to this change. But I'm curious, sort of your personal take is sort of stepping into the shoes of the everyday user. Because one thing that I found, and I'm curious, if you've anecdotally experienced the same thing, is on rare occasions, I will have to explain to someone who is not as steeped in technology as you and I are, why, for example, they can't buy an audiobook from Audible, perhaps, in the Audible app itself, unless they have credits, in which case they can use the credit to do that. And that can come up in so many different ways. And so I'm curious, do you think that this change is one that is made truly in the interest of the everyday user, or is this something that is ultimately being done to sort of fall in line with what legislation has happened and could happen based on how Apple responds to it?
I think that from Apple's perspective, that they would rather have not done this. And I think that they're doing it in order to sort of manage their way out of what could have been a lot worse if they had not decided to sort of play ball with the JFTC in this case. And it may be sort of presaging how they're going to deal with a lot of these other challenges they're seeing from regulators and legislators as well, as trying to find a compromise. I do think it's a win for users because, as you said, I have also experienced problems where people open up their app and they're like, well, I have this app for Netflix. I downloaded Netflix. I installed it on my phone. How come I can't sign up for Netflix on it? And it's weird and it's confusing. And having to buy your Kindle books via a web browser and then jump back into the app to use them is also, it feels user hostile. And this particular rule that Apple's had in place for many years now has always struck me as a bit of something that feels like we're going to shoehorn customers into using our system, or essentially they'll have to go through and jump through all these hoops in order to get content. And that's been great for Apple's bottom line, but I don't think it's been great for either developers or for customers. So it may not be, something that Apple is very excited about doing for its customers, but I think it's something that will benefit them in the long run.
Yeah, so that I want to sort of drill in on that point that you made. This seems to be Apple looking at ways to deal with the current and upcoming legislation and regulation and a response to all of those things. I mean, what do we kind of think? Is Apple taking this opportunity to try. It reminds me of the movie industry, which back whenever Hollywood was kind of kicking off and they were figuring everything out, they went ahead and figured out their own rules and regulations for giving movies ratings and establishing a body to do that. Is this Apple saying, okay, we'll take care of this before the government or governments in many cases come in to try and make the rules on their end? And just from your personal sort of opinion, do you think that this is going to work, or are we still going to see regulation?
I think that it's definitely Apple's attempt to do that, but I think they're being a little bit recalcitrant about it. I think they're trying to make the smallest changes they can in order to sort of make those deals without having to give away too much. I don't think this is going to stop further regulation, because you have a variety of different countries around the world that all have concerns, and those concerns may differ depending on the country. We've seen stuff from the EU about this. Just this past week, there was South Korea made a law, passed legislation about using in-app purchase systems. India, I think, is now also looking at in-app purchase systems on digital platforms. So I think this is a bigger and bigger wave that's growing here, and Apple is trying to get ahead of it, but I think they're doing not quite enough to actually forestall any of it. So it may be that they end up sort of cutting all these little deals all over the place, which may just sort of, erode away at what the App Store is doing and the way that it's traditionally been run. And in some ways, it seems like maybe they'd be better off about making these big proactive sweeping changes, but I don't think they want to do that, because they'd rather, again, give away as little as they can in order to keep sort of the cash flowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Then sort of looking at the legislation and the requests and the complaints and things that are out there, any idea what concessions Apple might make next, if you had some predictions of where they could go now that they've allowed linking, or now that they're going to allow linking for reader apps?
Yeah, I think the other big one that sort of remains out there is the in-app purchase system. This is the thing that Epic, the game company, has been suing Apple about. It's what I've just mentioned in South Korea being a potential issue. I think Apple wants to be very careful about how it handles this, because obviously there exists the possibility that developers could exploit this, and for less reasonable, decisions, because you can kind of make an end run around things, right? If you just say, hey, we've got this app, you download it, you install it, and then every other transaction is done via our website outside of the App Store, then essentially there is a point at which they're just sort of piggybacking on the App Store, and Apple is making no money from that. And that can be both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on the exact nature of the applications in question. I think what's possible is that you'll see more loosening around the kind of things it's doing here for reader apps, potentially being expanded to other apps as well. That's a big question in terms of whether or not it will let apps that are not reader apps link to stuff outside in order to sort of move people towards other payment systems. Communications also, I think, is a big part of it. Like, how much will it let developers communicate directly with their customers and be able to sort of say, whether in the app or outside the app, that there are other options for them other than what they're being forced to use right now. So I think the purchase, it comes down to money, as always, and so I think you got to look at the places where Apple's making money and where developers making money and try to figure out where the balance there is going to be.